great and the good of the American Democratic Party will be gathering in Chicago this weekend. It's all ahead of next week's Democratic National Convention. It will see Vice President Kamala Harris officially become the party's candidate for the presidential election in November. It's a 4-day event. There's a lot of attention on it. We're expecting thousands of people in the city in what I think will be a bit of a show of enthusiasm for Harris and her running mate Tim Walz. Well, Richard Goodstein is a Democratic strategist and former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton. Richard, thank you very much for talking to us. What would your advice be right now to Harris and to Walz?
Keep it going. I mean, it's what's happened over the past 3.5 weeks is something that no one could have forecast. The trend lines are incredibly positive. And this is not said just by a Democrat, but by all the independent political analysts in the United States who really assess Kamala now as being the favorite. I mean, if you had told somebody a month ago when Trump looked like he was on a glide path to getting elected that he'd now be the underdog, they would have said, to whom? That's impossible. And here we are. And Waltz was a very positive selection. He's now viewed very positively by the public, in contrast to J.D. Vance, who's viewed quite negatively. And Trump is himself. He's proven he can't help but be the person that we have come to know. He can't just talk policy. It all has to be self-referential and, frankly, off-putting to most American voters.
Well, what we're seeing is Kamala Harris leading now in all but 2 of the 7 battleground states. So the momentum is there. Now she's got to hold on. Now, the one question that's going to come up again, and I think the Republicans haven't quite worked out their attack lines yet, she's got to answer the question, why didn't you speak up about Biden's decline? I don't think she's got the answer to that yet, does she?
Look, I mean, if you see Joe Biden yesterday, he spoke about the fact that thanks to him, prescription drug prices are going to be slashed quite substantially. I think this notion that he is impaired to the point of not being able to do his job is a Republican talking point. Yes, did he look miserable in that debate? He did. But, a few months before, he made Republicans look silly at the State of the Union address when he went off script and spoke to them extemporaneously. So, I think that's a Republican talking point, that somehow she has some explaining to do about that. Does she have some explaining to do about the fact that we've had record job creation, record new business starts, record manufacturing increases? I mean, that's all happened thanks to Biden. So I actually think that's not going to be a challenge for her.
The areas of policy that are more difficult for the Democrats right now are the economy, particularly immigration, and that will be where Donald Trump sort of comes into his own a little bit. Some of those areas of policy, they haven't been able to be wrestled with quite as vigorously as we would hope, because Kamala Harris hasn't done a sit-down, one-on-one interview yet. She says she's going to do one before the end of the month. Why do you think that is? Is she taking the decision that actually maybe it's better to, I'm on a bit of a bounce here. I'm not going to put myself under that scrutiny?
Look, I think she will, and she said she's going to have a major sit-down interview after the convention. Let's talk about the immigration for a second. The southern border in the United States would be controlled today, but for one person, Donald Trump, because there was a bill that was hashed out between very conservative Republican senators and Democrats that would have addressed most of what the problem is. And why is it not law? Because Trump said, do not pass this, Republicans. I want this as an issue. I don't want it resolved. And as far as the economy is concerned, again, Trump talked a great game, saying it was the best economy of all time, which was demonstrably untrue. He was the first president in 100 years to leave office with fewer people working in the United States than the day he took office. The economic growth was slower under him, forget COVID, than it was under Biden. And again, Biden's had record job growth. So I think that Harris realizes that the problem with the public perception of the economy was Biden's inability to communicate how good things were. And I don't think that's a problem that she has.
There has been a problem, though, in her vice presidency of communication because there were long periods of time where she seemed absent. There were lots of questions about what she was doing, criticism about how she handled the border as the so called dubbed sort of border czar. And she was seen as quite unfavourable amongst the American people, but also amongst the American press. What's actually changed rather than her not being Biden?
Well, obviously, borders are there's another Republican talking point. She was tasked with dealing with Central American countries about the root causes of why there was all this immigration. So that's a Republican talking point, which again, I think she'll be able to answer by what I said earlier about the fact that this would be resolved but for Trump. And look, I think she is now way more popular than she was even 2 months ago. Literally, the favorability rating that she's getting, she's now more favorable than unfavorable. Trump is considered the reverse. Most of the public considers him unfavorably. They just don't like him. And that was a problem when it was Biden versus Trump. Biden had a hard time talking about his accomplishments because he was just so old. People couldn't get past that. And I think for Trump, he's obnoxious and a criminal. And no matter what he says about the economy, immigration, or any other issues, people are going to have a hard time getting past the fact that he's just obnoxious. There's a reason they voted him out in 2020. And the more he's out there, they're reminded of what they did not like about him.
And Donald Trump is now the old candidate of the two, which we weren't saying when that debate was on. I was sat here in the studio broadcasting that debate live, and we were rapidly changing the programme, thinking we need to book some guests on to talk about what happens next to the Democrats. Well, I think if they knew then what they knew now, they would be beaming. Richard, thank you. Richard Goodstein, Democratic strategist and former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton.
Was taking advantage of the country for years, but so was every other country, in all fairness to China. Every single country was taking advantage of the United States. I can't think of one country where we were doing better than them. Japan was taking, Abe was my dear friend, one of the great men, great leader, but all of these countries were, I used to say, who signs these agreements? It's amazing that we economically survived because we had such bad negotiators or people were getting paid off. I actually looked at some deals. I'd say nobody could be so stupid to sign a deal that's so one-sided. Whoever made this deal has been paid off. And then I'd look into it a little bit, and all of a sudden he's working as an agent for that country 3 years later, 5 years later. Now, we change a lot of those deals. South Korea, we changed the South Korea deal. We made it from a horrible deal to a good deal. I changed the Japan deal.